Welcome to Igniting Change, the podcast where we explore innovation, industry trends, and how tech for good is solving the world's biggest challenges. Let's get into it.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Igniting Change, which is our Three-Sided Cube podcast. So today we're very lucky and grateful to have Thomas Davin with us. He is the Global Innovation Director at UNICEF, has been at UNICEF for over 20 years from looking at your LinkedIn. A long time, and doing some absolutely incredible work in various different areas of the organisation. So thank you so much for joining us today. So grateful to have some of your time. Yeah, can you just start by introducing yourself and the organisation, and then tell us a bit about the current role that you have?
Right. So yeah, you alluded to it. This year, 25 years in UNICEF. So we are now asking a dinosaur to be innovative. I don't know how much is that working out.
An expert.
You'd have to ask other colleagues whether it's working out. But yeah, so I've joined in UNICEF 25 years ago in Kosovo at that time. It was in the midst really of I would say the reconstruction following the war between NATO and at that time kind of Serbia. I was actually based in Kosovo before with other organizations. And I had been working on human rights and human rights violation before. So I had a lot of dark pictures in my mind that I needed to kind of exercise. And so for me, it was super important to stay grounded in what happens to a country after a war like this. What happens to its people? What happens to people who, are claiming and fighting for independence, for the right of self-determination. And I was lucky enough that UNICEF kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we've heard about some of your work here. You seem to know the context quite well. We'd love to work with you." And in truth, I haven't ever looked back. It's been an incredible journey, but it's been one where I felt challenged. I felt myself growing. I felt myself rewarded. I felt myself really enriched in so many ways. It's tough work. Most of the initial years of my career was about emergency response, humanitarian crisis response. So lots of personal risks where you put your life on the line. Quite often, a lot of also tremendously sad stories that kind of get inked on your brain and affect or impact your personality, who you are, how you respond to the world around you, and all of that. But also, a journey of hope in general. I would say a journey where I've seen so many just beautiful stories of surviving, stories of blossoming, of people who were going from desperate situation to suddenly looking at life with a hope in their eyes. So it's been extraordinary so far, and I'm certainly hoping it continues, whether in UNICEF or outside.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think extraordinary is probably exactly the right word. It sounds like it's a very extreme, like of the two different ends, in terms of, like you said, the sort of horrifying end, but then the hope that must come with that as well. But I mean, that's a strong 9 to 5 that you've got there. Like, that's a big job. It must feel quite like daunting at times in terms of the scale of the thing that you're trying to do. I can imagine that's a tough thing that you're doing every day.
I guess for most of the people in this industry, and I've seen some of your earlier podcasts, I find that thank you for your extraordinary work. It's really exciting to see the podcasts. It's also, at least from my view, I resonated quite a lot with the kind of energy that's quite a lot of your guests have, right? These are people in this industry or in this work that quite often don't even think 9 to 5. That's not a thing in that sector, right? People on most days would work 10 to 12 hours. That's just the norm. That is because this is a passion work. This is not about, getting bread on the table. It's about what really nourishes you, your passion, what you want to give back to the world. And it becomes who you want to be. So it is fabulous, the kind of energy and passion that you see from most people in this industry. And it is a place where in most times you see the result of your work kind of with your own eyes. Most times I will say that in humanitarian crisis, and this after some 15 years is also what became quite difficult for me. Sometimes you see a repeat, right? If you think of Palestine today, if you think of Sudan, if you think of Yemen, those are countries that have gone through crisis after crisis after crisis, and you kind of feel, it is so terribly sad. in truth, though, it's also every time a story of incredible resilience by the people who live there. You see them lose everything and rebuild, and then lose everything a few years ago and rebuild again. So it's a mixture of terrible sadness and what the humans can do to other humans, and you never quite recover from that, but also of the incredible resilience and hope that children particularly, but also young people and just parents, bring back and say, I'm not going to let that deter me from wanting to have a life for my kids and myself. So it's also really deeply, deeply moving, I think.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. And I can imagine because of the nature of the work, working particularly with children and young people must be incredibly sort of inspirational and driving for you, because it's the opportunity to not repeat, right? So to work with people that can then break the cycles sort of for future generations. And I think it's amazing the work that you and your team are doing in terms of working with the young people to get them to drive some of the innovations. So not just going into different countries and saying, right, we've come up with something in a room in a country on the other side of the world, and we're just going to kind of force it on you. The fact that you're working with them and collaborating with them, I think is amazing. Can you talk a bit about the Climate Accelerator Program? I think it's the Innovation 30 initiative. It's a mouthful.
Yes. But maybe if you allow me, I'll go back to your question, because I think I kind of ignored your question. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So what do I do and what does my team do? Maybe let me try to frame that. So I'm the Global Director for Innovation for UNICEF. The remit of the team that I lead is simple, I would say, if you describe it, which is we are there to accelerate the impact that UNICEF has in the world. So UNICEF is the UN organization focused on children and young people, so 0 to 18. Sometimes we also help young people 18 to 25. And the idea is, how can my team find ways to accelerate the impact we have? Those ways are, we call them innovation, but really it's an accelerator of impact. And we look at innovation in all the ways. So from tech, underpinned evaluation, from blockchain to data science, to AI, to machine learning, to data satellite imagery, all the way to behavior change, to innovative financing ways, to policy shift, everything. And then we work on all programs. Part, I would say, that is exciting, but also quite daunting, is that if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals that kind of the world gave itself as an ambition, what do we want to deliver for everyone in the world? Those indicators, those sectors that connect to children, we are very, very late if we want to reach those kind of ambitions. And to give you a sense, on average, we would need to multiply the pace of progress that we have seen in the last 15 years fourfold. So we would have to go 400% faster than the last 15 years if we want to reach the goals that we gave ourselves for children in the world. So there is work, but it's somewhat daunting, but it means, there is no bad idea, that everything should be tested out. And this is, I think, what nourishes my team. I keep telling them, the status quo is just unacceptable. So it means we have carte blanche to go and be crazy and be bold and be ambitious and try new things, because we know that whatever we are doing today is not good enough. So that gives us an incredible kind of opening and hope, and a little bit of, I guess, anxiety about, can we do that? So to come back to the Innovation at 30, so this is around climate. So when my team works on all sectors, so one of the focus that we have is climate. The focus on climate for us came initially from a conversation, like so many of the initiatives I work with young people and young entrepreneurs and champions on advocacy for climate in Africa and in Latin America. And we had kind of two eureka moments. One was they are very tired of the world telling them, oh, your life is going to be so hard in the next 25, 30 years. There is an incredible crisis of anxiety and mental health anxiety in many, many young people because of that. Yeah. And they're really tired of saying, you're going to be essentially living the consequences of what we, my generation and the ones before, haven't been able to sort out. They're very tired of hearing that. They're very tired of also hearing that as a victim. They want to be seen as an actor, as a stakeholder, as one that really can take control over some of that. They want to be agent of change and be seen as such. And connected to that, we had a second eureka moment in which we started discussing with some entrepreneurs and innovators, and they kept telling us, it doesn't matter if you have an incredible idea. the adults or the adult world is not ready to, one, listen to you or give you resources to get your idea to really make the change in the world or in your community that your idea is aiming to do. So we are stuck. We are going to be the victims. And even when we have good ideas, they're not really panning out. And so we decided to try to have a think about, could we as UNICEF try to change this? And so we tried this initiative called Innovation at 30. And the idea is essentially that Innovation at 30 focuses on entrepreneurs that have brilliant ideas connected to climate adaptation or mitigation, that have established a company. So these are not 15-year-old, those are quite often 20, 25-year-old. But those companies or those ideas are going to potentially are incredibly important for young people and children in the future. And can we as UNICEF offer our platform or connection to give them the ability to connect with funders, to impact investors, to people who care about climate, so that one, they recognize that those young entrepreneurs are incredible. So we focused on entrepreneur under 30 years old, to say, this is where it's happening. Those people are not waiting for us, but they do need our resources and they do need our investments. And we worked with a number of really top world leaders, thought leaders, academia, Cambridge, Oxford, MIT, to verify that those ideas that they were working on, whether they came from South Asia, Africa, Latin America, were truly at the top of their game from a science perspective. So those were not, fluff ideas. It's not, we haven't focused on them because they're young. We focused on them because they're the best of the best, even if they're young. So that's the idea. That's the hope that we have to try to see this initiative really blossom. And, we are testing it out. So this is really now year 2. The excitement is incredible, but the funding is not yet coming. So there's a lot more to do there.
Yeah, so there's still work to be done. I think that's the thing, right? It's the resource that, like you say, you have the best idea in the world, but the resources thing. So it sounds amazing, what you're trying to do. And in terms of, so that's one, that accelerator program is one kind of initiative that you and your team have done. Can you tell us about the process that your team goes through to sort of identify the critical issues and how you come up with the various initiatives and how you support them?
Okay, so the remit is acceleration. The process for us is something that can be seen as intuitive or not. So UNICEF is an organization in the United Nations that has offices just about everywhere in the world. So we have about 155 what we call country offices, so teams in Thailand, Guatemala, Nigeria, Tanzania, Afghanistan, Pakistan. They are all very decentralized. They have a lot of autonomy because they're expected to deliver on the remit of how do we really support the governments to deliver on giving the best to their children in their territories. That's an incredible strength because it means that the teams that we have there understand their context very, very well. They have great partnership with the people they work with, whether government or civil society. It also means that by nature, those are people that work kind of in their box, right? So I'm going to work with what's powerful in Afghanistan. And I don't have a lot of bandwidth because I work, 8 to 8 to think, what's a good idea from Guatemala? And so part of what the team was trying to do is, okay, can we align on a range of problems that we are struggling with as an organization? And so we worked with colleagues from global to regions to country to say, surely, because we work on children, we actually have the same types of problems. What are the major problems that we need to help the organization resolve to accelerate? And so we've essentially created kind of a toolbox of these are the key problems we need to solve. So I'll give you a few examples. One is we have about 225 million out-of-school children in the world today. And this is growing. And we don't really know or understand why does it keep growing. We have some ideas, but those young people, we generally really struggle to bring them back to school. And we struggle to then, even if they want or don't want to come back to school or cannot, we struggle to give them, degrees. That even if they can't or don't want to come back to school, they have something in their hand that can give them a better access to employment and a better life, essentially. So how do we resolve this is one of the challenges that we're trying to resolve. Connected to that, I'll give you another statistics. We normally say that at this stage, the global education system is kind of broken. And I'm saying this carefully, but it's largely true. So why do I say this? 70% of children who are 10 years old in the world, 70% of children who are 10 years old in the world who are in school cannot explain to you a text that they read.
Wow.
90% in Africa. So
Wow.
children who are going to school,
Yeah.
who are 10, who know how to read, haven't yet grasped really the explanation, the way to explain that text. So it is what we call learning poverty. Right? In other words, those kids are coming, there are teachers or not, but the schools are crowded, maybe the teachers are not coming as regularly as they could, maybe they're not as effective as they could, maybe they are, in Malawi recently we were discussing with a partner from the Ministry of Education, he was saying the average classroom in Malawi is 110 kids per class.
Wow.
Even if you're a brilliant teacher, how do you do that?
That's an important task, right? I mean,
there's
especially
so many challenges, exactly, right? So those are the kind of problems that then are kind of brought to my team, and then my team is trying to say, all right, so what do we know from Afghanistan to Sweden to Singapore to whether within UNICEF or outside of UNICEF, what do we know of initiatives that we hear excitement about? So we try to identify what we feel excited by. We then vet it. Is it really impactful? Because quite often we have a lot of innovations, and that's true across sectors. People are passionate about it. They talk a good game about it. And quite often when you say, okay, do you have an impact assessment, like a proper evaluation of the impact? That tends to be a lot thinner on the ground. And so we try to say, no, we want to be serious about this. This is a discipline. We want to bring innovation from a mindset to a discipline for UNICEF. And so we quite often say, if you cannot demonstrate to me that what you're working on has impact, and ideally, genuinely a major, comparatively, a major difference vis-a-vis doing business as usual, then we're not interested, because we're just not going to really change the world with this. So we try to focus on impact, and then the work of the team is to then say, all right, so this seems to work really beautifully in Tanzania. Can we test it out in Lagos, in Nigeria? And can we test it out in Mongolia? And do we understand whether it works across different geographies and contexts? And then ideally, the team then kind of raise this to about 8 to 10 countries. And if we can, again, demonstrate that this same innovation in education or water is really transformational, then we kind of say to the organization, all right, so we've done our job. We've demonstrated that something is really powerful, transformational, and it works across context if you do 1, 2, 3. And now it's for the rest of the organization to really take it to scale, and we focus our energy to another innovation. That's how we try to work.
Wow. And how long do you spend in that sort of initial period? I guess it varies, depending on the size of the innovation.
So absolutely, you're right. In an organization the size of UNICEF, it's about 22,000 staff. It means, change takes time. I would say technology, of course, as everywhere, means that we can work a lot faster, and we can prove or disprove the effectiveness of solutions a lot faster, again, if we are serious about that evaluation of impact. But still, if you want to bring something at scale, what we think of at scale, which means more in most of the countries and geographies that we work in, generally it's 4 or 5 years.
Okay, wow. So it's enough time. I guess you can't be like, okay, well, it's been 6 months, it hasn't worked. Like, moving on. Yeah, I mean,
we try to kill things within a year if we can. But even if we are excited and we think this is really, really working, the time for us to find the resources to scale it, and then to create champions that are going to say, in addition to ourselves, this is actually really cool. And that for this to kind of, I would say, there's the law of innovation, which says the early adopters, then the laggard, then the rest of the population, then the die-hard kind of, the same plays out in the UNICEF environment to some extent. And remember that, we are a UN organization, which means that we come with a great idea. We then have to convince our partner governments, which to some extent maybe are a little bit even more conservative than large organizations.
Yeah, of course, you've got all the politics and geography and everything else. I mean, I can't even imagine the kind of challenges that you must have in terms of, like you say, scaling something that has worked in one place and you've seen it work and you've got the impact. It's like, oh my God, this is great. This could be incredible. And then trying to translate that into other kind of territories and getting that same level of excitement must be difficult. And like you say, you're working with people who are immensely passionate. Like you said earlier, no one is working in this sector if they're not it isn't a 9 to 5. So, but they're presumably quite busy because there's quite a lot to do in the world. So like you say, kind of taking on a new kind of program or initiative to make space for that and then assess it. That sounds like it is a complicated complex thing, but it sounds absolutely fascinating. It must be such rewarding work that you're doing with your team.
It is really rewarding, and I have to say, and this is I think quite a special role also because beside my own team, and the team is quite special. In the UN, quite often you work with people because they're expected to engage with government partners that come to the UN a little bit later in their career. So you tend to have people who are 40-year-old or whatnot. My team, is closer to 25 quite often, or in their late 20s. So the energy there is incredible. But also because we work on innovation, we get to meet with incredible people. Some crazy people, but generally really, even when they're crazy, they're always thinking of things that never let you kind of dry and cold. They care. They spend a lot of their mental energy. They're really passionate about that change. So it is a luxury, I think, in many work to meet routinely with people that really inspire you or at least challenge you in different ways. It's fantastic.
Yeah, because I guess the nature of what you're doing, you have to think so big all the time. You can't be looking at the kind of, well, just the status quo, or like, oh, it must be. I guess you've always got to fight that thing of like, oh, but it didn't quite work here, or it won't work there. I'm going to make an assumption about it. You've got to kind of go for the biggest, most insane sounding thing that's like, how are we ever going to do that? But then, yeah, because that's how you make the big change.
I think the hardest, at least from my lens, is letting go or killing things, not because they're bad ideas. Those are relatively easy to see. But when you're struggling to grow something that you feel this could actually be really, really cool, how long do you give yourself and your team to kind of get to that stage where you say, all right, so we are seeing this work. Let's pursue that growth and that scaling because it's going to affect the lives of millions of kids. Or kind of saying, okay, we haven't been able to tell the story of that potential change or to connect with people who feel inspired by this, and we just need to let it go. And that's, I think, the hardest.
I can fully imagine. We are lucky enough to work with a few other organisations similar to UNICEF, and they've said one of the biggest challenges that they have when they're trying to roll out global programs is the scale is one thing and everything that comes with that, but then the sustainability. And they say, we can make this work, but we're white knuckling it, so we're making it work because there's a few of us working 24 hours a day around the clock, and that isn't sustainable. It's going to burn out, and then you can't have an initiative launch that people then start to depend on that then suddenly disappears. You have to know in advance if it's going to be sustainable or not. And that measuring impact, I think you said about that is something that seems to be a real, not impossible, but just a real challenge across the kind of third sector in terms of being able to tangibly measure what is the impact beyond the just a few people seem much better and that's surely a good thing. That, being able to give that real kind of data in that scalable way. So I can imagine that is a real tough thing to have to sunset a project.
It is also, I think, because quite often in the world that we work in innovation, at least in the social work, we have found, tends to come as people start doing their job. And so part of what we are trying to do is to encourage our teams to say, so UNICEF, let's say in a country, I was based in Thailand before, UNICEF, let's say in a context like Thailand, we would normally have a body of work that is for 4 or 5 years time, right? So we discuss with the Thailand government and we kind of say to Thailand, do you still would like to have UNICEF support in your work for the next 4 or 5 years? And what key areas would you like that support to focus on? And so part of what we are trying to say is at that stage of the conversation, ideally, then you're able to say, okay, so we want to make a difference in child health, but Thailand is doing really, really well on child health, actually comparable to the Netherlands or France in terms of the child mortality, despite the difference in revenue. On education, we want to make a difference, but neither one of us really has the perfect solution. So can we look at this sector as one of the sectors where we will together innovate? And then that becomes, I would say, a pathway in which you acknowledge that you're going to need resources, you're going to need time to try things out. And then it doesn't become like an added to your 10 hours, 12 hours workload. It becomes part and parcel of it. And you start thinking, am I getting more result than if I was just doing what I was doing 5 years ago? It becomes a little bit easier to connect those evaluation of impact. But it takes thinking about it a long time in advance. It also takes courage for the government partner to say to their supervisors, I don't really have the answer about how do I resolve these learning outcomes crisis that we have right now. And I'm wanting to find the answer, but you have to trust me that I'm going to do my best. It's a tough conversation when you're a functionary.
I can imagine, having to go and say, actually, I don't have the answer and I need to work with an external body to get it. Yeah, that must be a real kind of act of bravery to do that. Thank you so much for that. That's so fun. I mean, I have about a million questions. That stat about 10-year-olds is staggering. The 70%. That's kind of really ringing in my ears. But so in terms of the kind of the time you said about the time, the sort of 4 or 5 years, and the work that you're doing, and you've been in the organization for a little while. So in terms of the role of technology, I mean, you having had that kind of front row seat in the UNICEF organization, like what role does technology play in the organization? And again, particularly in your team, how does that work?
So in this team, we are, I would say we are at times schizophrenic, but on the whole, we are quite bullish about technology. In other words, we look at technology as a major accelerator of results and impact for children across most sectors that we work in. And actually, with the advent of Gen AI, even more so. We think this is going to be a revolution in education, in health, in social protection, in communication, in so many ways. And we are testing a few of those. I can speak about this as well. Part of what we also say is technology is a tool, but when you think of social impact, you need to look at that tool and whoever is wielding that tool, and the process and the systems in which that tool is being used. So quite often what we are trying to say is, yes, we think AI is going to be a game changer, absolutely. If you want to think of AI in schools, you need to think of the teachers, because if they're not comfortable with technology, forget it. And then you need to think of, how do I equip my teachers with at least digital literacy? And how do I explain to the Ministry of Education that they are likely going to need to change a little bit their staffing structures, and they're going to have to introduce some new roles. So it is about a whole systems of HR in the Ministry of Education. And then it means, how do I procure different computers, or how do I procure different Wi-Fi systems? So there's a whole ecosystem. And we quite often try to make the argument that if you look at technology kind of as a vertical, you're probably going to forget the other enablers and the sustainability elements that are going to make that technology genuinely reach the results that you are seeking. That's why I was talking about schizophrenia to some extent. Like, we always say, yes, we are with you. We are absolutely convinced about Gen AI. We think we should be very bullish about it, but it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, and I guess there must be some kind of caution, and I think complex is going to be the word of this podcast, because it feels like everything you do is layers of complexity. But that, when you were saying about the technology in the classrooms things, I've got friends who are teachers. I've got a 9-year-old son who is very, very into technology, and the way he uses technology, I've spoken to his teachers and they sort of say, he knows it better than we do. So there's that kind of dynamic of like, they're trying to teach him how to use it. And he's like, well, no, that's not how you use it. An iPad, like, do this. So I think right now is a really interesting time where with, like you say, generative AI and all the advancements that's coming out in technology, of trying to get that taught in schools and get the teachers on board with it when they've been teaching in a particular way for as long as they have. And again, it's changing that status quo, and then making sure that the children are being taught in a way that is kind of up to date, and also safe. So the safety element that comes with technology, there's always, a lot of people that I've spoken to on this podcast when we're talking about the use of technology in the third sector and how it can be such an amazing, incredible thing. And then there's the kind of other side of the coin of the concerns that come with using technology. What kind of challenges do you foresee with technology in the space that you're in?
So first, I do think if you think of education, we think it's gonna be a revolution, and we're not even certain to even fully understand how much of a revolution it is going to be. We today know, and we work with a number of solutions that are using Gen AI, so machine learning and Gen AI, and where we tested it. So I'll give you one example. We're working with a Finnish social enterprise that uses AI in mathematics specifically. We've tested it. They've been working on it for 20 years. It comes from a Finnish university. So they've been really working about how does that work in the classroom, and they have a beautiful solution at relatively small scale. So we've used it in Bhutan, and we had a comparator. We've used it in 4 schools, and we had 4 other schools where we were not using it. In 3 months, the 4 schools where we're using the solutions outperformed the others by 40% more learning outcomes in 3 months. So yes, and that's just one example. We work with Khan Academy. Khan Academy is one, of course, of the most famous. The results are staggering when you work about this in a classroom that is a control environment, and when you work with teachers. So we think that this is going to be incredible in terms of the results. However, we also think that teachers should be the first beneficiary of this, right? Because when you think of children in the classroom, having an adult in the classroom is the most important. This is all of the science of education demonstrate that. Unless you're kind of 12, 13-year-old, you need an adult in the room to help you understand and shape your learnings and guide that. We know that in the world of today, we are on the verge of missing 40 million teachers globally because teachers is not a great, it's not a job that is in demand. There is not a whole lot of social appreciation for teachers in the world. There's not a great salary. There is not great appreciation for what they do or don't do. And so there's less and less teachers in the world. And on average, a teacher that we work with, not in OECD countries, but in the global south, would spend 40% of their day on administrative tasks. So they've gotten into a teacher role. They probably is their B choice in terms of work, maybe their C choice. They get a crap salary. They get very crowded classrooms and no real sense of social status by and large. And so the working conditions are not great. So we believe that if we can start with teachers, empower those teachers with the best tools, first to help them doing a lesson plan. And again, you can do that with Khan, but with other solutions as well. So you bring a teacher, let's say grade 5, I guess your child is 9, so grade 4 maybe. Today, the technology enables us to automate a lesson plan. So the teacher can say, okay, I'm going to teach math today. I'm in grade 4. Can you give me a draft lesson plan? And the technology does it in 2 seconds. And then the teacher can say, okay, but my class is a little bit unruly. Can you make it more fun? And then, okay, here's a bunch of exercises that we can do for you. That then frees the teacher's time to think, okay, Brian is struggling with this particular part of math. And I know Amelia is doing amazing. She needs to be challenged a bit more. Can you give more different exercise for these two? And the system can do that. So the impact, I think, is going to be tremendously powerful if we can do it right. Part of what we are trying to figure out is, can we look at solutions again that have proven outcomes? Because again, today, if you look at education, there's about 150,000 edtech solutions in the world. 150,000. Wow. So if you're a teacher or if you're a minister of education, finding out which one is the right one. So we've created a tool that aims to, which it's called the Learning Cabinet. The idea is to help ministries of education essentially cipher through which tool is safe, which tool has proven impact on learning outcomes, which tool is sustainable financially, etc., etc. And then that allows you to go quickly to a lot less, actually, because again, I was talking about evaluation. Out of the tools that we have been in contact with, less than a quarter have done an evaluation of impact or are willing to share it. And of this, less than half actually have proven positive impact. So it goes, quite. So the challenges are many. From, again, if you think of Malawi or others, about half of the schools in the world today are not connected to internet. So that's a very big first one. Then again, teacher training. Many of these teachers are not digital literate. So how do you really equip them with that literacy? How do you also convince them that this is not going to replace them? It's going to empower them to be the best teachers they can be, and ideally to bring them back to the stage of why they wanted to be teachers in the first place. It's going to take away all of the stupid stuff about doing admin and finding out who's absent and has been absent for 3 days. That's automated now by the system, and the reports to the teachers, to the principal, all of this, so that they can bring some energy and enthusiasm. So start with the teachers, and then they can then support the children. But that means, again, connectivity. It means having computers in the classroom. It means being able to share those computers. In many countries that we work in, the debt is suffocating, financial debt that those countries have is suffocating them. So how do you find the money to invest in those computers? There's all kinds of challenges, but the energy, again, to me, is incredible. I was talking to the Minister of Education of Togo a few months ago, and she was saying, we don't have a choice. We want to grow. This is a human capital growth that we are talking about, and we are very, very optimistic about the fact we're going to do this. So it's an interesting setting, I would say, but the energy is tremendously visible in all the countries that I've been in around us.
That's amazing. And I think because the concern a lot of the time with the sort of the technology side of it is that it will increase the divide in terms of the fairness. So it will make that gap even more. But like say, if you're starting at the root in terms of making sure that that's being sort of taken into account and that's being addressed, then the potential, like you say, 40% of the time being taken up with admin, teaching, again, teachers, you don't go into teaching if well, a lot of people don't go into teaching, I'd say, unless they're kind of passionate about it. And you especially primary school teachers, Christ, you've got to really want to do it if you're hanging out with kids all day, from my perspective. But yeah, I think it could be absolutely amazing. And just seeing how different schools, even in, I live in Dorset, it's a very sort of fortunate area, how schools are using it, you see the potential, you just think, God, if you just keep going with that could be absolutely incredible. And then you said about the teachers not feeling like they're going to be replaced. I think that's absolutely crucial in terms of that, the generative AI saying, okay, I'm teaching maths to a year 4 class. That's cool. But that key element is that thing of going, but Brian's struggling and Amelia needs a bit of extra help. And it's the teachers who will know that right now. Maybe in future, but you need that human element. And I know, again, from my son's perspective, he's autistic, so he has a lot of additional needs, and he works very closely with additional kind of staff. And he, as much as he can use an iPad and a computer and is great with that, he needs that human connection to really comprehend, properly understand it, rather than just kind of think he knows what he's doing. So yeah, I think, I could talk education technology all day, because I just think it's absolutely kind of fascinating.
It is incredible. And about the digital divide, to me, you're right, and this is, for us, it's an ethical dilemma, right? And we are quite often confronted with this and quite often challenged with it. I guess my response quite often says, actually, we need to do this. And the reality is that why would we not use a technology that we know is going to potentially be a game changer for these children? Second, in a number of cases, we are looking at a very different type of appetite. And I was talking about Togo recently. I was in Ukraine a few months ago, where I met the deputy prime minister responsible for education. And he was saying, we live a war on a day-to-day basis. Half of our kids haven't been to school for 3 years. They've been working remotely. And they're doing the best they can, but we are assuming they are losing out, and kind of losing out every year a little bit more. Yeah. And he said, we are willing to try anything that is transformational. So the risk appetite that you see in those countries probably vastly outstrips the risk appetite that you would have in the UK or in France or in others. And my sense is that their appetite to embrace new ways of doing is actually going to help them catch up in different ways, if we do our job right. It's a big if, but I'm quite optimistic, because those countries are telling us, I don't have a choice. I know I'm behind. I know my population is behind. So let's go full on. Let's try it out, and let's try to use the benefits of those new pathways, technology pathways, in ways that other countries may be a little bit more hesitant. We are not hesitant. We are fully in.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, and like you say, that kind of almost balances it a little bit in terms of that. where we're very fortunate we're not in a war, like we've got the luxury of being a bit more like, oh, I don't know, like we'll be a bit more conservative with it. But I mean, I guess massively compounded as well with the impact that was had on education through COVID, the lockdown, and how that impacted children, and the sudden need to use technology because we couldn't leave our houses, and how that kind of worked. And I think that showed actually that was another forced circumstance. It was like, okay, look what technology can do. This could be the thing that helps us sort of catch up. So yeah, I think it's amazing. And you went to the World Internet Conference last month in China.
Yes.
And can you talk a bit about that on the subject of kind of technology and education? Any kind of exciting insights?
Sure. So, I mean, one is for me was maybe the third trip that I was making to China. First, as a country, China is truly impressive when it comes to technology. They are really connecting the dot and using it as a systems. That is quite impressive, So the conference was happening in a relatively rural place of China, which was a 2.5 hours flight from Beijing and another 3 hours drive.
Oh, wow.
And I had landed in the country 2 days before, and by the time I arrived at the conference, they had all of this camera to enable people to kind of register in, and the camera were using automated facial recognition to everyone. And I saw, and they were showing you who you were as you were walking in, and I saw the picture of me walking at the airport.
Oh, wow.
So they already had it in the system, and the system was telling me, we know who you are. You just walked into our country, and that was 2 days ago. So that was already quite impressive. But again, to me, this is a country which is, at least from what I saw, I'm not a specialist, but from what I saw, was very keen to understand and test out responsibly, but still test out the various use of technology everywhere across the country. It's a very big country, right? 1.35 billion people. My understanding is that all the schools have access to computers and connected at different connectivity latency, but still huge focus on technology, because they do look at this as a way to actually have I would say, similar types of, so their expectation is that if you are a child in a very rural place in Shenzhen versus if you're in Beijing, at least at the primary and lower secondary level, your outcomes in terms of learning should be the same. And technology should be a way for us to understand whether that's the case. So an education management information system fully automated and centralized with flags that enable the system to understand, okay, actually there's a region that is lagging behind, so that they can query why is it lagging behind. And they are quite keen now to actually test out and understand whether Gen AI for them is something they want to go big on. Their default right now is to say, very likely we are going to go big into this. So what I liked, but of course it is, I guess, one of the advantages of a very centralized system. Let's be honest, it's a highly, highly centralized system. So it means that, when you have a government partner that says at the highest central level, this is potentially game-changing, we want to use it, then that trickles down very quickly. So that's one of the advantages. But also they set up very strong mechanism of evaluation. So that's also an advantage where they say, we're not going to do this half-baked. So we want to try it out. We want UNICEF support to help us understand what works. And then if that works, we're happy to kind of support other countries around us. So they're also quite big on what they define as South-South or partnership across other countries. So technology there is quite big. And it's one of the areas where they see, as many other kind of middle-income, upper-middle-income country, they see this as a way for them to establish their role in the world sustainably so, right? This has been the focus in South Korea. It has been the focus in Singapore. Those countries outperform most other countries in the world when you look at the PISA scores of learning outcomes. And this is a trajectory that China wants to take, and they're using technology to do that. So it also was an opportunity for me to visit big companies, Tencent and others, and what they do with tech is mind-blowing, honestly.
I can fully imagine. Yeah, it's I imagine, fascinating and just a tiny bit scary, but mainly fascinating.
Sure, right. So there's the risk connected to big technology. So if you're, as many of us work, if you work in human rights or if you work in things like this. If you start being seen as somebody who's problematic for the state, then that's not so good for you, and it's a problem in terms of human rights violation, in terms of the respect for people doing that kind of work. It's definitely not a place they feel is quite safe for them in different ways. So it's like any technology, right? Technology, we think as neutral, but it depends how you use it.
Yeah, and it depends who's made the technology and what their drivers are, and all the rest of it.
Sure.
We talk about tech being neutral as well, and then had an interesting kind of challenge from one of our guests a few episodes ago, sort of saying, well, you've got to also think about who's made it and why they've made it. But yeah, sure. Generally it can be used for good or bad, I think, but who's wielding it is definitely the important thing. So, I mean, in terms of sort of general, I mean, the education side has been fascinating. And I know you've worked across different areas in your career. I think I listened to a podcast that you did last month. I think you mentioned that education was particularly kind of close to your heart and an area that you particularly are passionate about. But in terms of the sort of general humanitarian and development kind of industry sector, brain just went completely blank there. So what kind of trends in technology are you excited about across the whole sector?
So there's quite a few. One is the use of satellite imagery to benefit that sector, and there's a number of use cases that are coming to play progressively. We are using one ourselves, well, a couple, but we're using one, for instance, to automate the recognition of school buildings, school infrastructure, so that we can help countries map out very specifically the geolocalization of their schools. We've now mapped about 2.5 million schools, and that then enables them to understand which of these schools are connected, and then we've created essentially a software that enables them to then have a real-time evaluation of the quality of that connectivity layer every 4 hours. So if you're a Ministry of Education, you spend 2 million or 2 billion, doesn't matter, really connecting X numbers of your school, we can then help you understand, are the providers of that connectivity really genuine, or am I being hacked, or am I, spending my money with no impact? So you can do that. So that's one example. We're using another one in recognizing deep bodies of water. So through that technology and underpinning ground mapping, we were able to start a project by which we are now able to find water up to 600, 700 meters deep. We're using it now in the Horn for the first time. The last time we had been able to go as deep as 300 5 years ago. So we are doubling the opportunity. And that's, for us, it's super important, because building a well at that depth is $500,000. So you better know that you're going to find water, because it's a big investment. So, but you can use it, and we are working with a number of partners using that to understand where population are moving, migration movements, destruction of facilities in conflicts or wars. We see that being used again in Palestine, in Sudan for migration, in Ukraine as well. So there's a number of use cases. So that's one aspect, I would say. The second, and we are super excited, is the use of large language models for access to information in your local dialect. And that's going to be, again, we think a game changer. So we're using this we're testing this in DRC, Congo, to give people that are working through so many potential crises. Congo is quite often, unfortunately, hit by a number of different types of crises, to give them access to where are the crises coming from, what's the right thing to do, what's the right behaviors, what do they need in their local dialect, in ways and with an immediacy that they never had before. So that's, I think, going to be very important. It's also going to be very important, and I'm sure many other organizations are doing it, in accessing factual information in your own language. That's going to be super important in what I think of as the future war on truth. Right? Because AI is going to be a major disruptor of what truth is, or is seen to be. So accessing the right information in your language in ways that you can query and follow through is going to be, I think, major. And the other bit would say chatbot and access to, on your mobile, to ways to upskill, reskill yourself. And again, using Gen AI in ways that was not possible before. We think that's going to be a huge game changer, whether it is about community health workers having access to information in ways they didn't have before, or a young person wanting to skill themselves. And we are testing out new ways to do that through WhatsApp, for instance, at even 2G latencies in ways that we couldn't do before. So there's so many directions in which there's going to be so much excitement to see, I think.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. I think the kind of theme through all of those, as you're talking about them, that's kind of coming to me is the pace at which you can move because of the technologies. You said about the satellite imagery, and I was lucky enough to speak to someone from UNHCR, and they were talking about the use of the satellites for mapping out refugee camps and seeing resources and being able to see, okay, well, actually, this has only got one sort of, toilet or whatever, and we haven't got enough tents or whatever it might be. And she was saying that the way they're able to get that information and then put it into a model that can then dissect it and analyze it and then sort of say, right, okay, you're lacking these resources. It would have taken weeks or months before, and kind of is in days. And you think, God, that's such incredible pace, and the way that will then help people. And then the LLM as well, we were speaking to an organization. We are very lucky. We get to speak to incredible organizations like you all the time. So I love to sort of exchange stories. But an organization who works with people who are hard of hearing and deaf, and they're talking about, because you said about the dialects and the amount of translation that is needed in sign language, and the kind of ratio of people who speak sign language and people who are deaf is crazy. There's like hardly any translators available. And the work that they're doing in terms of trying to sort of use AI and the models to make translations happen, again, is like, God, that's going to increase the ability for people to have difficult conversations with, lawyers, doctors, not having to bring their children in to translate for them because they happen to speak, be able to sort of translate that. I just think it's amazing. And it all comes back to that pace and how quickly you'll be able to then help more people.
So on the same, I forgot to say, but I'm with you very much. So we are on a project which we called Assisted Digital Textbooks, which essentially aims to make digital textbooks digitalized and accessible to children with visual or hearing impairments in ways that we couldn't before. So before, you would take a textbook and it would take about 18 months to make that essentially translated into for children with disabilities, either visual or impairment. And now we're working with OpenAI in the project, and we believe we soon are going to be able to do that in about 3 weeks' time.
Wow.
And that's going to be a revolution for these children, a revolution in accessing knowledge.
Yeah, 18 months down to 3 weeks is incredible. And you think, and that, I think the exciting thing as well is, that pace is only going to get faster. So it's not going to be unrealistic to say, okay, it used to take 18 months. Now it takes 18 seconds or something. There's going to be a point in the future where that's going to be the case. It's just crazy. But yeah, so I think it's it's good to exchange these kind of things, because I think it can be that you mentioned earlier about sort of this generation having not my generation, the next generation having a lot of anxiety about the future, because a lot of what you hear is like it's all going to hell and everything's terrible and technology is going to ruin our lives and the rest of it. So I think focusing on the ways that technology is just going to be absolutely incredible, and particularly for children, the next generation, I think is so wonderful. So amazing. Well, thank you so much. That was such an interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure everyone that listens
I
will.
did too. Thank you for having me. It's again, and thank you for the work you're doing. The podcasts that you've had before are all super, super inspiring. And I think for anyone interested in that sector, just going through the podcast, gets you passionate already.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, we've been so lucky to have so many incredible guests such as yourself, and just being able to listen to the work that you do is just so incredible. So thank you so much, Thomas. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.